It's being recorded. So hey guys, welcome to this video where we have Josh from Team Training and Luke from PS Nutrition. We're just going to go through all things endurance today. We're going to be talking a little bit about training and nutrition, and just kind of pick Josh's brains about how we put the plans together and how we can align nutrition and just have a good old chat. So welcome, Josh. Thanks so much for coming onto this call. So Josh, you program all of the endurance programs with Team Training, correct?
Correct, yes.
Perfect. And these programs at the moment are kind of split into 5K, 10K, etc. Like when you're thinking about kind of putting these together, should people kind of be using these for like leading into competitions, or just kind of general based training? Like where do you think kind of people should be using these? Maybe coming from like a CrossFit side of things or more functional kind of side of things as well?
Yeah, so some of the programs I've sort of indicated on there that they could run alongside your existing CrossFit programs. Something like the swim biased only is something that you could do alongside, say, like a strength cycle or a CrossFit based program where it's only 2 or 3 sessions a week.
Yeah.
Something a bit more that takes a bit more kind of dedication, I suppose. Like if you were training for your first 100-mile bike ride or your first triathlon, you would need to dedicate more time out of the week. Depending on how dedicated you are. I mean, some people can only fit in 1 session a day, but then some people have a little bit more flexibility in their lifestyles and they can do 1, maybe 2 sessions a week. So yeah. In there, we always indicate how many sessions that go ahead each week. So then people can kind of gauge, right, I can actually fit this in, but I could also run a swim bias alongside that.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
The thought process behind it.
Yeah, the rise of the hybrid athlete, or people that are doing everything, is quite big at the moment, isn't it? With your training at the moment, are you solely focused on kind of more endurance, or do you do a little bit of strength training as well along the side?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of the strength training, which I try and do once per week. It's not a session where I'm trying to get stronger. It is basically just to kind of maintain the muscle groups that I use on a regular basis. I mean, like endurance training, where it's very repetitive. Something like running is quite high impact. You're using the same muscle groups over and over and over again. So trying to strengthen all those smaller muscle groups as well, and like your joints and your tendons and things like that. So that's kind of where my head is at with my strength training.
Yeah, I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to try and do everything. And what I really like is, like, for you, it can run alongside things. So looking at the number of sessions and then running alongside that, I think is, like I say, superb. And picking your priorities, what we talk about with nutrition, trying to do everything. You want to get lean, you want to get strong, you want to get powerful. Like, I think the beauty of having Team Training is that we have the ability to pick and choose. Same with the nutrition side of things with the hub. You can set things up to identify your primary goal. This is really important for everyone that's listening, is to try and do that, and then have these little things, like you say, supplemented along. So you might kind of, tag on the swim training or whatever. I think that's a really important thing for me, from that concurrent training side, when you're trying to have a mixture, which I think is brilliant, but you still got to have that slight priority, that slight primary goal that you kind of work.
And I think that'll vary during the year. So like now, for example, like it would be, for me, it was triathlon season. So if people wanted to train for their first triathlon, now is a good time to do it. But for example, when autumn, winter comes around, they might think, right, now I want to get stronger, so I'm going to jump on a CrossFit strength bias program. But I also want to get better at cycling, so I'm going to run a power development program alongside that. So like you say, people have just got to kind of prioritize and kind of set some goals, and then choose the right programs based on what their short or long-term goals are.
Yeah, but before I hand over to Luke, he's going to grill you a little bit more. But I think that's a really key point that you made about across the year. Yeah. When we're thinking about nutrition, I like to say to people, get your training set up first. I know people talk about 80% of being nutrition and, to make a change and whatever, but it makes it so much easier, in my experience, if you identify what my training schedule is, what my primary focus is for my training, and that's going to be a really consistent pattern over 2, 3, 4 months, then align your nutrition to that.
Yeah.
Rather than being like, oh, I kind of follow this diet, and then you're like, well, actually, I'm either not eating enough because, or whatever, or I'm not eating too much, or I'm trying to set up for muscle, but I'm doing 75% endurance. Like if you understand your training stimulus, then align your nutrition to it. So that's a really key point for me, for everybody that's on team training, to do that first.
Yeah.
Then use all of the resources that we have to identify your setting your nutrition plan up, and then, like you say, it will be adjusted, periodized, whatever over the year.
Yeah, I mean, like an example is there's no point like an endurance athlete like myself eating like a bodybuilder.
Exactly.
Because my main source of energy is going to be carbohydrates. Yeah, protein's important, but there's no point me smashing 200, 300 grams of protein a day because I don't really need it. So yeah, you're dead right there. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Luke, dive in. What we got on the question list?
A lot of my questions were going to be all about periodization anyway, and periodization for yourself, which we've already touched on there. It's that idea of obviously changing your intake for the work that you're doing, right? Which obviously you've said no point in yourself eating like a bodybuilder, but I'm assuming, and this is where you correct me if I'm wrong as well, that your nutrition will change, not just kind of building up to a race with, carb loading and hydration strategies and all that, but also across the season. If kind of you're in a low intensity, higher volume block, that might look a little bit differently, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, dead right. I mean, like I say, when it's kind of off season winter, I like to sit a couple of kilos heavier as well, because there's less likely that I'm going to get injured. Yeah. And there might be a little bit more volume, less intensity, but a bit more volume there. Whereas in season, you kind of pay attention to a bit more like the conditioning of your body, like you say, the hydration and the quality of food goes up then, because like you say, you're trying to, especially when you're trying to work to those like marginal gains. But yeah, dead right.
Nice. Yeah. And another thing that me and Liam have talked about a fair bit with nutrition before is this idea of optimal recommendations not necessarily being practical. So we're going to throw some numbers out there and contextualize it a little bit, but with what we kind of currently know in the research, a recommendation for carbohydrate intake during an Ironman, so during something that's over kind of 3 hours, is around 90 grams of carb per hour, right? That is a lot of food. Just in your experience as well, Josh,
yeah.
How tough is that to do? And kind of how different is that to normal day-to-day training and intake there as well?
Yeah, so I mean, to begin with, firstly, like you say, that you pick that number there, and that is a good number to go by. But like anything, it takes practice, trial and error, something that you have to do in training. There's no point kind of like going into it having not practiced it before, and then you go into the race and you try and put down 90 grams of carbs per hour, because the likelihood is your tummy is not going to take it. Yeah, exactly. So everyone's different. Some people can tolerate much more. Some people can tolerate a lot less. I mean, we were just speaking off camera. I did the majority of an Ironman yesterday. And for me, I consumed the most I had ever on the bike. I took in roughly 2,000 calories on the bike leg alone. So you can kind of like, but it's because I've practiced it and I've built up to it. I haven't just jumped straight into that. So it's something that my body has had to kind of condition itself to. And I've obviously had to choose the right carbohydrate sources. So looking at ingredients, because we all know that certain products have certain ingredients in, and that can kind of set things off as well. So it can get quite complicated, but the best thing is trial, error, practice.
Spot on. And I think that trial error practice, I think, that's definitely something that people should take away. And so if they are looking to obviously using team training programming, build up to a race distance that requires some intra workout fueling to kind of perform at your best, making sure that you do practice it, and that idea of kind of training the gut almost, so that you don't come race day, if you Saturday end up Paula Radcliffing it, as we say.
And I mean, I wouldn't, like you say, I wouldn't practice that nutrition strategy all the time. It would be on those bigger key workouts. If I wouldn't try and take down 90 grams of carbs an hour if I was just doing, say, like a steady 3-hour ride, because your body doesn't need it. So yeah, it's all about the type of workout you're doing, where you're at in your training block, how close you are to race day, that kind of thing, or just close to kind of testing or whatever, because these type of things can be kind of simulated in all different types of activity sport.
Yeah, exactly that. One other thing. or Liam, have you got something you want to jump in?
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask a relatively trendy topic in the endurance world, and something that is still very much a theory, but something that's bounced around in performance nutrition, is the train low, compete high theory, which is again kind of extending this idea of periodization to you train in a reduced kind of carb availability state. So less carbs when you're training, and then competing with a ton of carbs, because we know that we're kind of reliant on our glycogen stores when it comes to race day, right? Is that something that you have practiced before? And I think here it'd be good to kind of chat about, again, that kind of what we know in the research, marrying to you as an individual, and whether or not kind of that sort of stuff works for you.
Yeah, so I do some sessions where I'm kind of like you hear the term, people say, oh, I do a fasted training session. And that is just the whole purpose behind that is to kind of use different energy stores, so that you can like rely on that later on in an endurance event. But I try to eat a well-balanced intake of like carbohydrates and energy sources all through my training, because I don't try and deplete myself too much or run too low, because I think if you're doing that too often and then suddenly race day comes and you double your carbohydrate intake, the likelihood is that you might have to visit the bathroom. So like you say, it goes back to the practicing. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't do a race nutrition strategy every single week, but I would pick select workouts where I do practice it. And then for the remainder of the time, I just try to eat like a balanced intake based on the sessions that I'm doing. So I'm never in like a depleted state, but I'm just doing enough to maintain. And then, like you say, the bigger workouts, you kind of try to overfuel.
Ace.
I think that's a really, like, if you agree, that's a sensible strategy, some sensible advice there. I think often people think train low, compete high. Oh, it's going to help, increase mitochondrial density. It's going to help me to be in a fat burning or whatever you want to call it state, which is going to make me more efficient. Whereas actually sometimes being in a depleted state has other effects, such as, you're eating less, so there's less nutrients, there's less overall macronutrients. Then it can impact immune function. And if you are training in a constantly or, more regular depleted state, it has other impacts in terms of, your overall well-being as well. So I think that's a really important point to go for anybody that is doing endurance training or CrossFit training or any strength training, is actually, like Luke said, fueling for the work required is really crucial. And then picking certain times to replicate and test and trial, strategies is really.
If I put it this way, I mean, this could be taken if you're doing like a test lift in strength training, or if you're doing an endurance workout. So I'm trying to do a session on the bike and I'm trying to hit certain numbers. So I'm trying to work way above threshold. If I don't fuel that session right, one, I'm not going to hit the numbers, which is going to massively affect my confidence. Two, like I said, I'm not going to be able to basically progress my training because I haven't hit those numbers. And I mean, if you're putting more into your body as well, you're able to work harder. So you're burning through more energy anyway. So it all works hand in hand. If I underfuel certain sessions because I'm trying to kind of like fuel low, train high, the likelihood is I'm not going to hit the numbers I need to progress my training. And that's going to affect your confidence, which could affect your motivation and all sorts. So like you say, it's all about fueling those key workouts and choosing the right times to maybe fuel low, like you say, the low aerobic sessions, or if you're just doing some isolation movements in the gym or whatever.
And quote Liam, something that he said on many, many times is it's what we do on average that counts, right? So you can get obviously too caught up in, should I do this session fasted? Should I be trialing something here, when that overall kind of daily intake, and if that's not on it, and if you're not consistent with that, then there's probably no point looking into that anyway.
And as well, like you say, if you underfuel one of those key sessions, you might have a great session and hit the numbers, but your recovery is probably going to be pretty bad because you've not fueled yourself correctly during. So you've broken down the muscles way more than what you would have if you'd have just fueled it a bit better.
Yeah, definitely. Josh, do you follow a specific macronutrient or calorie target?
I don't follow a calorie because my training is so kind of like versatile. It kind of changes most weeks depending on what I'm kind of building for. But I do pay close attention. So I just use the tracker through my Garmin, to be honest. But because that is the only source that I use, I know it's like reliable. I'm not looking at different sources of like trackers. So I basically base it around that. So I try and consume as much as what I'm burning that day. I mean, yesterday I burnt like 8,000 calories. I wasn't going to eat 8,000 calories back, but I tried to do my best to kind of get close to it within reason so that my kind of recovery is sped up a little bit. So I pay close attention to my expenditure and just kind of trying to eat a balanced diet around that so that I can keep coming back day after day. Because like we said earlier, it's all about that consistency. There's no point having one good day and then 4 bad days.
That's it. And I think that level of complexity sometimes isn't needed. And I think that's what a lot of people worry about, that they need specific splits, specific breakdowns, and it needs to be this on this day and that on that day, high carb days, low carb days. Whereas if you are just making sure that it's aligned to, you know, your training or your output or whatever, and it's aligned to your goal, where you probably, you know, you don't need to be in a deficit, you need to be at a maintenance or even a very slight surplus at certain times. I think that's just something that we really hammer home, is to be like, that simplicity is what you need.
Yeah.
However you do it, you could use our calculator, you can use, you know, your output, or you can basically just follow something that you've been doing for a while and understand, does your body change? Like if I eat very similar every single day, so I don't need to change, because I'm like, well, I know that my weight stays the same, so I'm at a maintenance. So if I ate a little bit more, added in a snack, added in a pre-bed meal, then I'm probably going to be in a surplus, so I know I want to put away. But if I need to drop it a little bit, I'll be like, okay, I'll just drop something out of my regular diet. And when you kind of explain this to people, sometimes you can see them go, oh yeah, that's a really easy way to do it. But it's not easy, is it? So like being consistent is not easy. So that's really nice how you kind of do that using your Garmin. Now, eating back the number of calories that you burn is something that we have tried to answer before. And in the endurance world, obviously, there's sometimes very high caloric outputs. On an average training session, is it okay to be able to, do you struggle to hit that calorie target to make balance?
Yeah, so not all of my, so I mean, like I say, if I have a particularly kind of like big day of training, like if I'm getting ready for an Ironman and I have a 6-7 hour training day, the likelihood is I'm not going to be able to consume all of those calories back, because one, I'm going to feel pretty bad during the training, and two, afterwards you're just going to feel bloated, sluggish, tired. So it's all about choosing, like I say, the right foods, and obviously relying a little bit on supplementation. So I'm taking on energy gels, like carbohydrate mix whilst I'm on the bike or running. So I'm just doing, and again, it comes down to like the trial and error. So I'm putting enough in my body to get through the training without feeling a little bit rubbish and upset in my stomach, but also enough that I know that I'm going to be able to come back the next day, not necessarily do like a hero workout after a big day of training, but I'm going to be in one way or another, like good shape to carry on.
Yeah. And the body doesn't know 24 hours. This is
Exactly.
what I can to people. I'm like, just because you burnt 8,000 calories that day doesn't mean you got to eat 8,000 calories that day. Like,
No, exactly.
You know, if your output the next day is probably going to be relatively low, because you're not going to go and do another Ironman.
Yeah.
So you can always then bump up your intake on top of what you normally do and try to offset some of that.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I'm doing today. Like I'm having an off day of training because I had a really big day yesterday. So yeah, my expenditure is going to be low. But like I say, if you look at, a lot of people look at like the 1 day averages. If you look at like the weekly average, then obviously I'm still in a huge deficit from yesterday. My body is craving like nutrients and food. So I'm not going to like stuff my face all day and eat rubbish. But if I feel hungry, I'm going to eat, because my body's obviously asking for it. Yeah, you've got to be, it's great for having a plan to follow, but to a certain extent, especially if you're training at a high level, you do need to be slightly intuitive with your eating and hydration.
Yeah.
And that comes from experience and practice though as well, right? Like we've been saying, no one knows inherently just out of nowhere how much they kind of should or shouldn't be eating. It's about obviously seeing how you feel with the amount of food throughout the day, with the type of food. And that's why I think for me, it's kind of similar to Liam, I guess, in terms of what I eat at this point in time. Like it's the same day to day. So I don't need to track it or measure it. I know I'm eating good quality stuff, but if I ever kind of I'm hitting a change in maybe training volume, a change in goals, if I want to put on some mass, that kind of thing, that's kind of where I will spend a couple of weeks maybe tracking, changing the intake obviously to meet that. And then once I'm comfortable again, I'm intuitive with knowing what that amount of food looks like, how I feel with that amount of food, then I can kind of be like, okay, sweet, I don't need to worry too much about the numbers. I know what it looks like on a plate. I know day to day, and I know how I feel if I'm not hitting that. And I think that's kind of, again, not something that comes naturally to everyone. So it is one of those where, as much as we're saying, yeah, you need to be intuitive and get to that point, it does come from a bit of practice and application there as well, right?
Definitely. And having someone, like I say, I've not done this on my own all the time. I've had people that I can feed back to and speak with. I've had coaches who I can like advise, like you guys do, advise people. And then over time, you kind of like get a bit more in tune with your body. So it's always nice having that person there to kind of say, oh, I'm feeling like this today, or I'm doing this with my training. What would you advise? But like I say, it all comes with experience as well.
Yeah, you got to earn the right to be intuitive.
Yeah.
Like, I think we're terrible at eyeballing. I think we're terrible at being intuitive. I think it's, the way I like to describe it is educated eating. Once you've educated yourself around it, then you understand it. And like say, you've got to earn the right. We're terrible at eyeballing. And if you have never done this, tracked or understood calories, macros, amounts, portions, followed something consistent, then just kind of having a bit of a shot in the dark is where people often go wrong. And then energy balance, especially for endurance athletes, is really crucial, because I'm sure everyone that's done endurance sport, whether that's running, whatever, has hit the wall or felt that time when you get a little bit lightheaded, a bit dizzy out on a ride or a run, and you're like, this isn't very nice. So again, understanding that and building that consistency is crucial.
Definitely.
Do you take any supplements at the moment? Have you followed any supplement schedule or regime recently?
So I've always supplemented with like whey protein. That's just something I use for recovery. So if I've done a training session and I'm not able to get a meal in pretty soon after, I'll have a shake, because it's just a quick way to, one, get some calories back, to get some protein in and just start the recovery. I also take obviously like all my gels and carbohydrate mixes, which I usually just use to supplement and fuel my sessions. And kind of, because for me, that's, like I say, it goes back to the practicing for race day. It's something I need to use and use regularly so that my body's used to it. It's not necessary for every single person. But if you're doing that type of sport, then it's something that you need to kind of take on a fairly regular basis. Not every day. Like I don't just sit here and suck on gels all day, because I'd rather have something a bit more tasty. But you know what I mean? Like you use it for the right sessions. And then I just take like cod liver oils. What else do I take? A multivitamin and iron at the moment. But I've played around with a few things before. But I think, like anything, if you're supplementing, you need to be consistent with it. There's no point having like a few days of taking supplements and a couple of days off. I find if I take things regularly and then stop, I notice the difference.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily see the benefits of it from taking it all the time, but it's only when you stop taking those supplements that you see it.
Yeah. I think with that as well, it kind of depends on the supplement, but for the most part, definitely. One thing that I don't know, you may or may not have tried, that I personally, I don't know why, but I'm a big fan of it. Nitrates, beetroot juice, that kind of thing. Have you tried that before within like endurance events?
Yeah, and that is becoming slightly kind of like more popular now. Like you hear people like preloading on nitrates like before a big workout. So like 2 days before or a day before, they'll start taking like nitrate shots or a nitrate supplement, and then obviously taking that through the session as well. So that is definitely creeping into the kind of like endurance world, and it's something I've tried. I mean, I've not really kind of found the one that I particularly like yet, or something that I can include in my diet every single day, but something like, say, like beetroot juice or like those kind of extracts. I think you can get like cherry juice as well, has got some in. But that's certainly, again, and that's something that you'd need to be consistent with to really see the benefits of it, I think.
Just so that people know kind of the potential benefits of nitrates from endurance perspective, a lot of the evidence and the research from this is basically this idea that they make you more efficient at producing energy, which is mad, but essentially reducing the oxygen cost, if that makes sense. So like in a certain workout, you need to consume less oxygen to get the same amount of energy to perform as well when you're taking on nitrates, which is where kind of the potential benefit is there. So it's one that, as we've kind of said, is potentially worth looking into. Whether or not it's worth investing kind of for every day, if you're just kind of a recreational athlete, then you probably don't need to. But for someone like yourself, Josh, who's looking at the top level of this kind of sport, it could be an extra 0.0% or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot of research coming out as well in terms of the impact on nitrates and strength output as well. So a lot of people, like you said, Josh, will take it 2 to 3 days leading into an event or on an endurance event, but actually now acute doses have been shown to help improve power output, strength numbers as well. So it's, it's a really great thing to kind of, be, like you say, it's a layer. Once you've got the baseline, the supplementation is an extra layer on top of this. Some really cool things. Okay, it's good. Like you say, you need to be consistent, and that's the key thing. Seems to be a key theme of what we're talking about today. But it's the same thing, is that you can't just do 2 training sessions and expect to go and run a race. It's the same with nutrition, and it's just unfortunate that with nutrition sometimes it's that you got to eat multiple times a day where you only have to kind of train once. For you, which is where a lot of people kind of go wrong. They're either very consistent through the day and then evening meals are off, or it's consistent Monday to Friday, and then they're like weekends are a little bit off. So it's just trying to, this is what we're here to kind of help people to navigate that. So,
I mean, for me, I've kind of, so I actually come from a bodybuilding background, believe it or not, when I was like in my...
I could definitely tell.
Oh yeah, I'm huge now. No, from when I was like in my late teens into my 20s, I did a couple of men's physique shows. I mean, back then I was just, all about lifting weights. I mean, I was about 3 stone heavier then. So I've kind of done that really kind of strict dieting, not always enjoyable. But obviously you're doing it for a reason, you're doing it for a reward. But now, because I want to see day after day consistency, I kind of try to do everything in moderation. So for me, my diet is 80-90% clean, and then 10-20% a bit of what I fancy. So if I'm out on a 4-hour ride and we stop for a coffee, probably not going to turn down a slice of cake. Because
rightly so.
Exactly. I mean, I don't feel like you can deny yourself all the time. I'm not saying have something a bit naughty every single day, but like you say, it's all about that weekly average. One bad treat isn't going to upset a whole week. So people shouldn't necessarily feel guilty about that and build that bad relationship with kind of what they're eating.
I think that's true. But if your treat is every day, it's not your treat. It's just a daily intake.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you treat yourself on top of your treat, and then that becomes your treat, and that's where we go down a slippery slope. Something to be aware of for sure.
It's all about context, isn't it? Like this idea that I've talked about before about how food in itself, like people sometimes give it labels of good or bad. So that treat, you might feel a little bit guilty. Oh, I shouldn't have had that cake. But it's like, it's not good or bad in itself. It's the context in which you're having it. So obviously on a big old bike ride at the weekend, like, I'm going to have a slice of cake. It is, as we say, a treat. But as you said, in the context, if that becomes an everyday thing, then that's when it can start to feed into overeating, which, as we know, has some consequences.
Exactly. It should be based around like occasions as well. Like I wouldn't just say if you're just sat at home, I fancy a treat now, I'm going to have one. No, probably like if you're going to go out with some friends and you want to have a drink, or like you say, if you're out on a long ride, it just gets to a point where if you're kind of denying yourself this day after day after day after day, when you've got that craving, for example, that's when you can kind of go a bit off the rails. So if you can kind of like know and just kind of be a little bit kind of like give and take. But like I say, you've got to be disciplined to some extent, for sure.
Couple of things before we start wrapping up, mate, quickly. You said you did a Ironman yesterday, but only completed some of it. That was because it felt a little bit of tweak in your quad, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I got about 12K into the run. Quad was a bit tight, and then I felt kind of like a really big like pinch like in the middle of my quad. Was then really struggling with mobility all down that leg, and that kind of indicate like that. You could see that in my pace straight away. Yeah, and then after that, it just proceeded to get worse and worse and worse. And the position I'm in at the moment, like I was battling for a podium spot at that point. I was then kind of out of the running because of it. So it was best for me at the time to stop after, I mean, I got to about 20K, but at that point I still had another 22K to run. So the damage that you can do in that time, it was a tough decision to make, and I'm gutted today, to be honest. But yeah, like I say, Luke will probably be able to expand a bit more on that, on the implications that that could have if I'd have just sucked it up and carried on and just finished rather than kind of competing for a podium spot.
Yeah, it's about looking at that big picture, isn't it, as well? And although it sucks that you didn't finish, and obviously you said that getting a DNF is not something that you've ever done before, it's, to quote one of my favorite movies of all time, Hot Fuzz, it's for the greater good, right? So you can go again, obviously spend some time recovering. So let's talk about recovery and kind of injury nutrition as well. Something that we've kind of got on the hub a fair amount of information on, and a couple of courses there. Do you know, have you started kind of implementing any injury related nutrition to get back on your feet quicker?
So, I mean, like for me, I kind of know what a good diet looks like. So today, rather than kind of like feeling sorry for myself and kind of eating what I shouldn't, I've kind of gone back to how I would eat on a normal day. So I'm kind of like today, I'd always try and prioritize, like if I know I'm not going to be training today, I'm going to prioritize protein slightly higher than carbohydrate intake, because I'm not burning any energy today, but I still need to keep my calories up, but just choose the right macronutrients. So protein, like my body's broken down, basically the muscles are broken down, they need repair. So protein for me today is going to be the best source. But also getting a mixed kind of like you say, you go back to, like you sent me some information about kind of like the rainbow plate, and that's something that I try and do most days. So people talk about getting their 5 a day in, I probably try and get 10 a day in, to be honest, like through, not just through fruit, but vegetables and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's really good. Often people think they're injured. So there's two reactions, isn't there? So that I just eat what I want. I'm not going for a bit. But that the added layer of inflammation that can be caused by poor quality food can really impact healing. So the fact that you've kind of gone back to, like you say, your healthy diet and increasing the real nutrient density of your diet is absolutely brilliant. That's completely spot on. And you also mentioned that you haven't, drastically cut your calories, because you're like, you're still going to be eating over the day, and a slightly higher protein intake, maintaining people's caloric intake is so crucial, because healing has an energy cost. If you restrict or go into a super aggressive deficit because you're like, oh, I don't want to put my body fat or whatever, I'm not moving as much, I'm not training, so I'm just going to slash my calories, then the healing will be delayed. Because you're not providing your body, as you mentioned, with the building blocks to repair and regenerate. So increasing protein and slightly, at least eating at maintenance, if not maybe slightly higher, what you're doing there is exactly what we want to do in the early stages of any kind of injury, niggle, tweak, stuff like that. So spot on, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, if I tell you what I've had today, you can correct me if you think I'm doing
better.
So I woke up, had a coffee, because that's the most important thing to do straight away. But yeah, I had a bowl of porridge. I have about 85, 90 grams of porridge oats, a scoop of protein in there, and then chopped a banana and had some blueberries. And then I was still a bit hungry, so I had some fat-free Greek yogurt, just because it's decent protein. And then I've just had an early lunch because I was a bit hungry, so I had lunch about 11:30. I had a chicken sandwich with salad in and an apple. And then in between then, I've just been kind of taking on electrolytes, because sweat and dehydration from the day before, like potassium levels, magnesium, sodium levels will all be quite low. So I've just been kind of trying to drink plenty and kind of top those levels back up. And And then I'll probably have an afternoon snack, like I say, like some Greek yogurt with some fruit, maybe a protein bar, just to kind of top the protein levels up a little bit. And then tonight will be, yeah, whatever we decide to cook. It's usually like we quite plant-based. We eat lots of vegetables, so it might be like a tomato ragu with vegetables, with some pasta, and then some sausages. And that's probably about my day.
No, I mean, mate, Luke, it sounds good, doesn't it? Like getting protein in the early part of the day,
yeah,
is such a crucial thing that often people can miss, because inherently breakfasts are really high carbohydrates, you know, jam and toast, bagels, cereals, stuff like this. Whereas getting protein in at the start of the day is very crucial. So the fact that you've done that is excellent. 2 different types of fruit, you know, 3 different types of fruit even before lunchtime. So apple, banana, blueberries. They all have different nutrients. They all have different polyphenols, different properties. So that variety is so crucial. So, you know, for me, that distribution of protein when you're injured and when you're training is a really essential part of maintaining hunger levels, but also to help with repair and recovery. So from injury nutrition point of view, absolutely spot on. And like you say, slightly plant-based allows for quite an abundance of, you know, maybe such a larger meal, an abundance of different vitamins, minerals and stuff like that, mate. But yeah, it sounds, you know, spot on. And like you say, that consistency across the week is going to be helpful for you to come back into training and be hitting the ground running, but heal in a, you know, in a quick, optimal way. Maybe after the acute phase, so after kind of 2, 3, 4 days, when the real kind of higher inflammation starts to settle, this is when we want to maybe increase, like, you know, oily fish, or increase your supplementation with cod liver. One thing that often people think about doing is try to dampen all inflammation. You want to moderate, you want to, you know, kind of manage it, and actually kind of really high dose anti-inflammatories at the start is something that has just been shown to, again, impair healing. So as you kind of get into this week, real kind of anti-inflammatory side of things, slightly higher fat, and then that's going to really help with clearing that, mate. So
spot on.
Good stuff.
No, thank you.
But yeah, Josh, thank you so much, mate. So is there anything in the pipeline for programming wise on the on team training? What we got planned?
So yeah, so obviously depending on how this phase of like triathlon programs go, the idea is to then look more towards the kind of like middle distance, long distance triathlon, which is obviously a much bigger commitment from people, because they're going to be kind of like 16 to 20 week programs at least. And for those programs, you would need some background experience. I would recommend that you have done a triathlon or an endurance event of some sort. Like I say, I wouldn't recommend anyone to go from, like, say, just doing like strength training, CrossFit, right, I'm going to train for an Ironman in 5 months. It's always good to kind of have some kind of base level there. So that's why we've kind of brought out the sprint Olympic distance kind of side first, because they're not, you don't have to dedicate so much time to it, but it kind of gives you that good experience of what to expect, and the type of training, and obviously how your body responds to it. And then from there, you can kind of move on to think, right, yeah, potentially I quite like this. I could do a middle or a long distance with the right training. So that's something looking ahead, later on in the year. And would be a perfect time to start that in like the winter months, getting ready for the season, like early kind of like April, May time, June time. So
brilliant, mate. That's fantastic. Superb. Well, thanks so much, Josh. What we'll do is we'll get this out. If you've got any questions for Josh or any of us on anything endurance, then make sure you send them in, and we'll do a short, sharp Q&A video in the future, just to kind of rattle through some of your questions and keep it a little bit shorter and more to the point. But Josh, that was awesome, mate. Luke, I absolutely love talking out. I want to kind of talk a little bit more, but 40 minutes I think is a good time. So we'll wrap things up there, and like I say, send in any questions. Josh, thanks so much for your time, buddy, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.
Awesome. Cheers, Josh.